You're sitting across from someone, maybe a coworker, maybe a stranger, maybe someone who cares about you. They're talking, and you're listening, but your eyes keep drifting to the table, to the wall, to anywhere that isn't them. Not because you don't care, not because you're distracted, but because something inside you tightens the moment your eyes meet theirs. Your chest stiffens, your breath shortens, your thoughts scatter like startled birds. You tell yourself to just look up, to act normal, to hold it for a few seconds longer. But your body doesn't listen, because somewhere deep inside, eye contact doesn't feel like connection. It feels like exposure, like standing under a bright light with no place to hide. And here's the paradox. The very thing that protected you once, the ability to disappear without leaving the room, is now the thing quietly isolating you. You learn to survive by not being seen, but survival has a way of overstaying its welcome. What once kept you safe is now keeping you lonely. To understand why eye contact feels unbearable for some people, you have to stop seeing it as a social skill and start seeing it as a nervous system response. Eye contact is intimate. Neurologically, it activates threat detection circuits. Psychologically, it signals presence, attention, and vulnerability. Relationally, it says, I am here. I see you. See me too. For someone who grew up in emotional safety, this feels grounding. For someone who didn't, it feels like danger. This is where hypervigilance enters. Hypervigilance is not anxiety. It is vigilance without rest. A state where the nervous system learned to stay alert because unpredictability was normal. Where scanning faces, moods, and tones became a survival skill. In environments shaped by emotional neglect, volatility, or conditional love, children learn something quietly devastating. Being seen invites consequences. So they adapt. They lower their gaze. They monitor instead of engage. They disappear just enough to avoid becoming a target. Over time, this shapes avoidant attachment. Not because they don't want closeness, but because closeness once came with cost. Eye contact becomes symbolic. It represents emotional availability. And availability once meant exposure without protection. Then there's the emotional neglect schema, the internalized belief that your inner world is either irrelevant or burdensome. When this schema is active, being looked at feels like being evaluated, judged, measured. So the mind pulls away before the body ever has to feel rejected. Even the brain's default mode network plays a role, replaying past social misattunements, reinforcing the belief that visibility equals risk. This isn't a flaw, it's a system that learned to keep you alive. But survival has a cost, and the cost is invisible. You learn to speak without fully arriving, to listen while half vanishing, to exist at a safe distance from your own presence. You sacrifice authenticity for safety, again and again and again. This is invisible grief, the grief of never quite being known, the grief of relationships that feel close but never deep, the grief of moments where connection almost happens, but doesn't. The philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote about living the questions themselves, and this is one of those questions. What happens when the self becomes something to hide? The core fear isn't eye contact. The core fear is being witnessed without control. Being seen when you're not prepared. Being read when you're not armored. Being known when you haven't rehearsed the version of yourself that's acceptable. So simple moments become complicated. Conversations feel like performances. Silence feels exposing. Presence feels like pressure. And slowly, quietly, the world becomes something you observe rather than inhabit. This doesn't disappear with age. It evolves. You might notice it in relationships. You care deeply, but struggle to feel truly intimate. Eye contact during emotional conversations feels overwhelming. You default to humor, intellect, or caretaking to avoid being seen in your raw state. In your career, you might be competent but invisible. You avoid speaking up unless you're certain. Meetings drain you more than they should. Visibility feels like risk, not opportunity. Your self-worth becomes externally calibrated. You feel safest when unnoticed or praised, never neutral. Silence feels like judgment. Your boundaries blur. You read others constantly but struggle to name your own needs. You give before being asked. You retreat before being rejected. Emotionally, regulation becomes effortful. Your system oscillates between over-control and shutdown. Eye contact can trigger dissociation or restlessness. Internally, your identity feels fragmented. You know who you are alone, but not who you are when witnessed. These are not personality traits, they are coping mechanisms. And the first step toward unlearning them is witnessing without shaming. Not forcing eye contact, not pathologizing yourself, but noticing, gently, when your body pulls away. That noticing is the beginning of safety. Healing doesn't mean forcing yourself to stare into someone's eyes. Healing means teaching your nervous system that presence no longer equals danger. This is where inner child reparenting begins, not with affirmation but with attunement. You learn to stay with yourself the way no one else did. Shadow work allows you to meet the parts of you that learn to hide, not to erase them, but to thank them. Nervous system regulation teaches your body a new rhythm, slower breathing, grounded posture, moments of safe connection that don't demand performance. You practice choosing softness over survival, a glance held for 1 second longer, a moment of staying instead of fleeing, a quiet acknowledgement that you don't have to disappear to be safe anymore. As Carl Jung once said, what you resist persists, what you accept transforms. The goal is not to be fixed, the goal is to become whole, to let your eyes meet the world without bracing for impact. If this resonated with you,